Today we're talking about a hazing death that happened at Tennessee State University in 2001. The death of Joseph Terry Green, Jr., a 25-year-old Navy veteran who died during an Omega Psi Phi fraternity initiation. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that it wasn't the first time this exact fraternity at this exact university had a pledge die. And as we'll see, the institutional response was about as inadequate as the first time it happened, as inadequate as the first time. Before we dive into this tragedy, let me paint you a picture of 2001. This was the year we were all figuring out that we absolutely needed cell phones, even if we could only use them after 9 p.m. when the minutes were quote-unquote free. And don't even get me started on how plans with unlimited minutes had us completely losing our minds. We'd all made it past Y2K without our computers crashing, and on the week of the incident that is the center of this story, Outkast was still recording as a duo with Big Boy and Andre 3000 on top of the charts with Miss Jackson. Oddly enough, Miss Jackson herself was on the cover of Jet magazine on the very date of this horrifying incident. It was January 29th, 2001, around 3 a.m. at Whites Creek High School. Joseph Terry Green, Jr. and 7 other Omega Psi Phi pledges from Tennessee State University were ordered to meet at the track for some fraternity initiation activities. Well, that didn't seem out of the ordinary, but what Joseph could not have known was that less than 3 hours later, before most people in Nashville were even awake to start their day, he'd be dead. The initiation activities that morning were supervised by fraternity members Rajwal Brown and Tyrone Rogers. And to be clear, I'm not sure if I'm saying Mr. Brown's name correctly, Rajual. Joseph and the other pledges were commanded to perform various activities, including calisthenics and jogging, as part of their initiation into the fraternity. But this wasn't a normal workout session. This was exercise as punishment, exercise as control, exercise designed to break these young men down in the name of brotherhood. And the activities had been going on for hours in the pre-dawn darkness when Joseph began to struggle. Around 5:30 a.m., while jogging on the track, Joseph suddenly collapsed. When the other fraternity members reached him, his body temperature had spiked to 103.7 degrees Fahrenheit. They rushed him to Skyline Medical Center, but it was just too late. Dr. Bruce Levy, the Metro Medical Examiner, ruled that Joseph died from exercise and environmentally induced hyperthermia, which is medical speak for his body was overheating to a deadly degree, combined with an acute asthma attack. Let me be clear about what this means. Joseph was physically worked to death. His body couldn't regulate its temperature anymore because it was pushed beyond human limits. When asthma kicked in on top of the hyperthermia, his body simply gave up. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragic coincidence. This was rather predictable. The result of forcing someone to exercise beyond their physical capacity in the name of fraternity tradition. Now, it's worth mentioning Joseph's background to you. Joseph Terry Green, Jr. was born on January 11th, 1976, which means he had just turned 25 years old 2 weeks before his death. He was a Navy veteran who had served his country and was now pursuing his education at Tennessee State University. Joseph was described by those who knew him as a well-developed, healthy young man who was eager to join the brotherhood of Omega Psi Phi. I'm certainly no doctor, but it seems like Joseph was no stranger to physical activity, and at 25, he was a few years older than the typical undergrad, but young enough that normal workout activity wouldn't likely have killed him. After his military service, Joseph was ready to embrace college life and the camaraderie that came with being part of a fraternity. And I can't help but wonder if he knew that the organization he wanted to join had already killed one of its pledges at this very same university just 18 years earlier. That would be Van L. Watts, We covered his story here on this channel. He was the Omega pledge who was killed in 1983, alcohol poisoning, again at Tennessee State University. When the news of Joseph's death broke, Tennessee State University was forced to respond. TSU's Director of Student Activities gave a rather vague non-response that was printed in the Tennessean. Let me share with you. Quote, Ron Miles, TSU's Director of Student Activities, declined to say what charges the administration might bring against the fraternity. He said, "We believe violations were involved, definitely, but I can't be specific on it at this time. I think the university probably has all the information it needs to bring charges in relation to violations we determine in the student handbook." End quote. Ron Miles. Now, I don't necessarily expect you to remember every single name that I have uttered on this channel. At the time of this recording, this channel is new with only 3 videos. This one is the 4th. But this is something that I just caught. Ron Miles, the man who gave the quote I just read, is also named in my previous video about the hazing death of TSU student and Omega pledge Van L. Watts. Van was pledged to death in 1983 at Tennessee State. Well, this very same Ron Miles was a prominent faculty member at TSU at the time of Van L. Watts' death. Here's a clip from that previous video. The lawsuit revealed that Ronald F. Miles, Director of Residence Life and Associate Dean of Student Affairs, had written a letter to the fraternity before Van's death, ordering all pledge activities be stopped until further notice. Yet Miles reinstated the fraternity just 2 weeks later. So there's that clip. So, Ron Miles was at TSU during Van Watts' death in 1983 as Dean of Men, Director of Resident Life, and Associate Dean of Student Affairs, and then was still there 18 years later in 2001 as the Director of Student Activities when Joseph Green died. That's an incredibly damning detail. The same administrator oversaw the institutional response to both Omega Psi Phi deaths at the same university. This means Ron Miles had direct experience with how deadly Omega Psi Phi hazing could be at TSU, yet failed to prevent it from happening again. He was literally sued as a defendant in the Van Watts case, so he knew exactly what the stakes were. This institutional continuity makes the failure to protect Joseph Green even more inexcusable. It wasn't ignorance. It was willful negligence by someone who had already seen this exact scenario play out with fatal consequences. And listen to this quote from Carl Hunter, the advisor to the TSU Omega chapter, and tell me how this sits with you as a response. Quote, "While the fraternity has strict guidelines prohibiting hazing, you can't stop individuals. You really can't stop people from doing wrong if they want to do wrong." End quote. Well, how very reassuring for parents who are sending their children to this university. Essentially, the university's position was, we have rules, but if people break them, what can we do? That's not accountability. That's a shoulder shrug. Nevertheless, TSU launched an investigation into the incident. What makes Carl Hunter's dismissive attitude even more infuriating is that, again, this wasn't Omega's first rodeo at Tennessee State University. Joseph Green was the second Omega pledge to die at TSU. The first, we know, was Van Watts, the 20-year-old junior who was found dead on November 30th, 1983, the morning after an Omega initiation ceremony. His blood alcohol level was 0.52%, which is more than 5 times the legal limit for driving. Van also had bruises indicating that he had been beaten with switches as part of his initiation. So we have the same fraternity at the same university using the same deadly initiation practices spanning nearly 2 decades. And somehow, Nobody learned anything from Van's death. Neither students nor faculty, it seems. A criminal investigation was launched into Joseph's death, and some evidence was turned over to the district attorney's office for review. But no criminal charges were ever filed. Despite what appeared to be a clear case of hazing that resulted in death, despite witness testimony about what happened that morning, nobody was held criminally responsible for Joseph's death. The two fraternity members who supervised the deadly initiation, Roswell Brown and Tyrone Rogers, were conveniently no longer enrolled as students when reporters tried to reach them for comment. That's interesting. Joseph's parents, Lentora Parker and Joseph T. Green Sr., were left devastated by their son's death, as I'm sure you can imagine. I've said it before here, and I know that I'll say it again in almost every video to come. It should be a reasonable expectation for parents to send their children to school and have them return home safely. My God, Joseph returned home from the military safely, but couldn't survive pledging Omega Psi Phi at Tennessee State University. That says a lot. In January 2002, nearly a year after Joseph died, his parents filed a $15 million lawsuit against Omega Psi Phi's national organization, the TSU chapter, and the individuals responsible for their son's death. The lawsuit specifically named Roswell Brown and Tyrone Rogers as the fraternity members who ordered Joseph and 7 other pledges to meet at Whites Creek High School for what the court documents called illegal hazing activities. Terry McNabb, the family's attorney, said Joseph was a daily runner who was in good health with no history of asthma or other problems when he collapsed. The family was seeking $5 million in compensatory damages and $10 million in punitive damages, not just for their loss, but to send a message that this kind of institutional negligence couldn't continue. TSU suspended the Omega Psi Phi chapter for 5 years and said the fraternity wouldn't be allowed to have parties or participate in intramural sports or other campus activities during that time. Oh no, not their flag football privileges. The national organization could petition to reactivate the local chapter after the suspension period. But let's be real about what this meant. A 5-year suspension might sound serious until you consider that most, or likely all, of the students responsible would have graduated by then anyway. This punishment was essentially a slap on the wrist that allowed everyone to move on and forget about Joseph T. Green. This 5-year suspension was the same joke of a punishment that the Omegas had received at TSU when Van Watts died in 1983. So this was their second 5-year suspension for killing a pledge. At what point do you say enough is enough? By 2001, hazing deaths had become a predictable annual occurrence. According to experts, at least one fraternity pledge had died every year since 1970 from pledging or hazing activities. 42 states had anti-hazing laws on the books, but as Joseph's case proves, having laws and enforcing laws are two very different things. Tennessee law specifically prohibited hazing and required every college and every university to have written policies against it. The Tennessee Board of Regents system, which oversees TSU, defined hazing as any action taken or situation created intentionally to produce mental or physical discomfort, harassment, or ridicule. Running someone to death at dawn sounds a little more severe than physical discomfort, so it certainly qualifies as hazing according to their own law, yet nobody faced any criminal charges. What's most damning about this case is how it exposes the complete failure of every system that was supposed to protect Joseph. The university had anti-hazing policies. The state had anti-hazing laws. The fraternity itself had quote-unquote strict guidelines. Yet none of that mattered when it came time to actually prevent a death or hold people accountable afterward. Carl Hunter's comment that
you can't really stop people from doing wrong if they want to do wrong
perfectly encapsulates the problem. When you're in a position of authority and your response to a preventable death is essentially, boys will be boys, you're a part of the problem. Universities profit from the traditions and alumni networks that fraternities provide. But when those same organizations kill students, suddenly it's not the university's responsibility. It's a convenient arrangement that allows universities to have it both ways. Joseph Terry Green, Jr. would have been 49 years old today if he had lived. He might have had a family, a career, maybe even grandchildren. Instead, his life ended at 25 because a group of college students decided that their initiation traditions were more important than human life in the wee hours of January 29th, 2001. Unfortunately, Joseph's death wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that continues today. Students are still dying in hazing incidents across the country, and universities are still responding with the same inadequate measures: temporary suspensions, policy reviews, and promises to do better. The tragedy isn't only that Joseph died, it's also that his death was completely preventable. If Tennessee State University had taken real action after Van Watt's death in 1983, Joseph Green might still be alive, or at the very least, he would have lived through his pledging process. If Omega Psi Phi had actually enforced their own anti-hazing policies, Joseph might still be alive. If anyone in authority had prioritized student safety over fraternity traditions, Joseph might still be alive today in 2025. Joseph Terry Green, Jr. survived military service only to be killed by college students playing deadly games. He trusted his institution to provide him with education and brotherhood, and instead, they provided him with a death sentence. This case represents everything that's wrong with how we handle hazing in America. We have laws that aren't enforced, policies that aren't followed, and institutions that prioritize their reputations over the lives of students. When advisors throw up their hands and say they can't control individual behavior, they're abdicating their responsibility to protect the students in their care. Joseph's parents fought for justice through the courts, but no amount of money could bring their son back. And sadly, their fight didn't prevent future deaths either. Students continue to die in hazing incidents because we've created a system where the consequences for killing someone during initiation are negligible. And for the sake of clarity, I need to tell you that I was not able to find the outcome of the lawsuit his parents filed. I have a feeling that it hit a dead end, just like the Van L. Watts case, but I am not certain. Neither I nor my research contributor were able to get that information. Every hazing death is preventable. Every single one. The systems in place keep treating hazing deaths as tragic accidents instead of preventable homicides. Joseph Terry Green Jr. deserved better. His family deserved better. And every student who pledges a fraternity or sorority today deserves better than a system that treats their lives as acceptable casualties in the name of brotherhood or sisterhood. This has been Dying to Be In. I created this channel to tell these stories, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims and hopefully prevent future deaths. To anyone considering joining a fraternity, sorority, or any organization that practices hazing, please remember the names Joseph Green, Robert Bazile, Nathaniel Swenson, Van Watts, and Caleb Wilson. Remember that no letters, no organization, no sense of belonging is worth dying to be in. If you know of a hazing story that needs to be told, please share it in the comments and share this channel with anyone who might benefit from this information. Because only by breaking the silence can we break the cycle. My sources for this story are on the screen.